Hello. Let's go ahead and get this going. Get this going so she can feed me lunch. So this is a common picture, the zones around your house. But I got a lot more information out there on the table about the very first zone. The first 5 feet around your house are really, really important. And need to make defensible space. You want what they call zone 0, up to 5 feet from there, a ember resistant zone. So if any embers coming in, anything within that 5 feet, you want to have all combustible material out. You don't want decorative bark around your foundation. Of course, you don't want needles. Another thing I learned yesterday at the fire symposium, anywhere where you have vents or gable vents, or where you have vents or gable vents or anything, to put a mesh screen no larger than 1/8 inch, because like I got to fix it here on the church. We've got a gable end that's got these lattice or these louvers. Well, through time, debris blows up in there and it gathers, and it's actually fuel. So imagine if there was a fire and one little spark catched in the wind that was from a mile away went up in there. That'd be bad. So they even said doing dryer vents, doing any outside access to your home if you can get that stuff. And they sell it down at Lowe's by the rolls and stuff. But they recommended the 1/8 inch, because like dryer vents and stuff like that, they're small enough that critters can't get in there. But we're talking about very tiny things. So really watch out on those. And like a few years ago, I was going around just before giving this, and I'm looking at my property and thinking I've done so good, and I look over, and underneath the deck is extra lumber. No. And they really don't want you having firewood within 30 feet of your structure. They don't want even stuff on your deck. What kind of things do you have on your deck that are more flammable? Do you really need them there? So a lot of cleanup to do. Yeah. I think they do sell the type that is like recycled rubber that looks like it. But no, things like mulch and things like that. I mean, think about if you could throw a match on it. And so then you figure in a wildfire, embers coming and winds blowing, and it's so. Pardon? It does, but it doesn't have the flash point like that. Just like, okay, that fuel truck that dumped over this week in Woodland Park, thank goodness it was diesel fuel and not gasoline. Diesel will still burn, just like, rubber will still burn, but it doesn't have that real low threshold flash point. I mean, they'd rather you not do anything like that. If you're going to do things like riverbed rock or things like that definitely will not burn. Yeah, they usually have 2 tanks within it. Oh, the first responders, and they train for that, but you never know how good your training was until you actually have to use it, and they've probably been training for that for years and years and years and never had to do it, but it looks like they did a very good job, a very commendable job. Yeah. Yeah, it was a big evolution. So, question. in a big trash bag and let the trash people take it. Oh, he's not allowed to with the needles? I would, I would recommend he stop by the fire department and ask them, and they'll know the different resources where you can take those things. Well, and that's a slash place. I'm not sure if they take needles or not. So, I mean, I was going to recommend that there is a slash place in Divide behind, up at the hill on the south side of the road. But some of those places don't take the needles. So I don't know for sure. So, yeah. There's got to be a way to dispose of them.
There's a place in Colorado Springs, south of Springs on like Las Vegas. I have to look it up, but I think it's like something Rocky Mountain. They recycle and they'll take needles.
Okay.
Bag, so you have to take them down to the bag and empty them. Anyway, that's what we said.
Okay. But like I said, for those questions, a lot of times just stop by the fire department and they'll know different resources where you can do those things. But yeah, needles are a whole different thing than slash, and nobody wants them.
Tim, right now, because of all the snow damage to all the trees, especially at Spectre Ridge, fire department is coming around and letting up all that slack, all those limbs, and making sawdust out. And we all
They've been doing that on their own? Is that how yours got cleaned up? Yeah, because the fire department does have a chipper that you can contact them, but after a major event like this, they're just automatically going around and doing it. So, other things to look at, and I didn't even think about it until I was helping Barb Royal repair her fence, is wooden fences not adjoining to your house. Put a chain link gate or something. Don't have it up against your house. I have a lot of new brochures out there that go over roofs and sidings and decks and fences and everything out on the table out there. So make sure you grab those. Those were new this year. Okay, go ahead and the next slide. Yeah, if it's all concrete, it's much better. And I wish I had a metal roof. I remember in Switzerland going up the tramway and looking down, and they had big rock pieces on their roofs, and it was all rock, and it was like, boy, that's not going to burn. We could learn a lot from our friends. Okay, so next slide. No, that's not the one. Anyway, while she's trying to get that up, trimming up the trees and everything, you can have trees right up against your house, but they better be trimmed up as high as you can get them, at least 10 feet up. And nothing within, I believe it's 10 feet of a chimney or anything, so you want to make sure all those things are a lot of space between them. What I have done with my trees, because I was talking to the forestry guys yesterday, and I have 15 feet minimum between each tree. And they not just for fire, but when we have droughts, if you have too many trees per square feet, they get stressed. And they're more susceptible to fire, but they're also more susceptible to infestation of pine beetle. I've got ponderosa pine on mine and pine beetle. There's also a larvae that attaches to spruce trees, and I've got information on all those out there too on what to do about them. But if you don't have too dense trees, there's less trees per square foot, so they have water in those lean years of moisture. You want to give them a fighting chance. Yeah, and just look at, on this one, they're saying a minimum of 6 foot clearance, but everything I've been seeing, and the more dealing with the insurance companies, they really want to see 10 feet. And that's not just 10 feet where the branch comes off the tree. It's where the branches are hanging down. I mean, the higher you can get them, the better. And Kitty was just sharing that, her insurance company is wanting to cancel them out, and she's got the same one I do, and I just had an inspection yesterday, so hopefully it goes good. But everything within 300 feet of my house, I've either thinned the trees and I've also trimmed them up to at least 10 feet off the ground. So hopefully I'm just fine. But like the inspector guy says, I just take pictures of it and then I send it off, and it's someone at a desk somewhere that makes that decision. So do a better job than you think needs to be done, because they're looking for an excuse to drop you. They really, really are, with all the fires that have gone on. I mean, it's sad, but it's dollars and cents. And it's a lot of things to do to get your house going. So I saw this source on wildlandfires.org, and they have a schedule of saying, okay, in week 1, do the landscaping against your house so you can take time and do it right. Just breaking it up. Week 2, go over the vents and eaves and mesh screening like I was discussing, looking at those things, possible entry points. Because if you try and do it all in one weekend, you're going to be overwhelmed or you're not going to do a good job. So it's an ongoing. Clearing gutters and roofs of debris, making sure that those needles are out of those gutters. And a lot of people can't get up on ladders and do them anymore, but I have information in the office that a few people from our church needed someone to come and clean their gutters. And I've gotten some really good people that were really quick, responsive, and very, very thorough, and did a very good job. And as I said, there's another brochure out there on decks and patios and balconies to make sure that, sometimes you look at those, until you read about it, it's like, oh, I never thought that would be a problem. So really good brochures. And then on the fencing also I discussed. So yeah, all those are out there. Also, this talks about that shrub on the right side. You want to go 3 times the height of the shrub between it and the bottom of the branches. So if it's a 3-foot or a 4-foot bush, well, 4 times 3, you want to make sure it's at least 12 feet between that bush and that first branch. Because bushes or low branches, it's all ladder fuel. And, they recommend 10 feet on this site, but when I talked to the Colorado Tree Service or Horticulture Department, and I told them doing 15, and they like that much better, at least 15. And that's on level areas. A lot of people have property that does this. That increases those. So for every, it doubles from less than 20 to 40% grade. That distance doubles. For trees and for shrubs, it is 4 times. Then you start getting steeper than 40%. They're saying at least 30 feet between trees. Just think about how that fire is going to go uphill. So you want more distance between them. Now, how do you trim them right? Let's see. How about the next slide? Keep going. Okay. Here's aftermath of a fire. And like this 403 fire that we had here just a couple months ago, not very many trees burnt, because they've done a lot of work over the years in that part of the national forest of trimming up the trees and not having ladder fuels. What I mean by ladder fuels is the smaller old dead branches going up. And that's just like a ladder fork. It'll catch the grass or the undergrowth, and then it'll grab those and it'll just keep going up. But as you can see, this forest is still just fine. It's defensible that way. It doesn't mean there's no way it can happen, but at least it's defensible. Okay, next one. This is what I was talking about, the ladder fuels. And I've seen it so many times around town, and there's a few people from our church. I'm going to go take care of theirs. They've got these boughs clear down low, and they're like, well, the deer like to lay under there and hide. And I'm like, well, okay, I like deer too, but I like my house too. And yeah, it'll just run up it just like a ladder. You know, you can look at the actual picture there on the left. I mean, it's just going all the way to the ground. Between the bushes on the ground and the branches, there's nothing in between them. So there's nothing to stop it. You know, it doesn't take nothing for the grass to get going, or a lightning bolt will come down a tree. And I was called out on one. I was on the fire department, and we dug and dug and dug around that tree, and it's like, oh, we got it out. About 3 days later, it popped up about 20 feet away, because it gets underneath that pine duff, and it'll smolder on the roots, and it'll travel. So, yeah, so try and get underneath your trees as clean as you can. Okay, next one. This was my house. I had a real major fire. I had a young grandson and his friend that I think were trying bad habits in their little fort. And the next day there was a fire. So I kind of think they were probably experimenting with cigarettes or something. But anyway, luckily, you know, I do a pretty good job at cleaning up, and you can see those trees, the trunks are all scorched and stuff, but that's been 8 years ago, and those trees are still just fine. So good chance that the trees will survive. And keeping it clean, you can see I keep it pretty clean underneath them, keep the grasses down as much as you can. Next one. So this is a example of a tree that needs some work. You can see all those branches coming out all the way up. That's just all ladder fuel. And I went and got a cheap pole trimmer. I mean, I even see at Harbor Freight, they're like $80 or $90 now. They're battery operated. They work great. They're very safe. The chain is a long ways away from you, so less chances of issues. And if the battery wears out in 30 minutes, it makes you take a break. I didn't get a second battery because of that. It's like 30 or 40 minutes of doing that. That was enough for me. But anyway, the next picture, this is what it should look like. I mean, you can see I went way high up there. I'm 6 foot tall, and so I went up probably 12 feet, as much as you can around the house. I mean, I'm not doing my whole property like that. I've got 36 acres. I'm not going to do all of it, but anything within a couple 100 yards of my house, I want to be like that. Okay, is that the last one? Yes. Okay, good. As I told you, I've got some new brochures out there. One is on dwarf mistletoe management, and I don't know if you know what it looks like. I had a lot of it on my property, and I cut 140 trees out. And I've still got some, but it's all on the downwind side, so it's going to blow away. And it's like, I'm not going to cut every tree down. And the trees that are infected, it'll take over 20 years for it to really possibly kill them. So it's not detrimental, but definitely on the west and north sides of your property, if you have any of those, you want to remove them. Because as those spores release in September, they're going to go with the wind, and they're going to go to everything downwind, and it'll just keep taking them out. So definitely want to stay on top of them. But like I said, you don't have to get rid of every tree, but just be considerate of which direction those spores are going to travel. Now I've got mountain pine beetle, which is for the ponderosas. And that's another that there's not a whole lot you can do except spray for them. And you've got to spray for them between the 1st of June and into the second week of June, because that's when they're getting mature enough to come out of the bark, and they're on the outside of the tree, and they're not mature enough to fly yet. So if you spray them during that time, when they're exposed, they're outside of the tree. I've sprayed mine, and it looks like it was raining beetles. I mean, they're just standing back, you couldn't see them. But boy, when I hit it with that sprayer, and I got a sprayer that goes up like 40 feet up. But they say with the mountain pine beetle, you at least spraying up 20 feet up is where they mostly populate. And then if you have spruce, they have the western spruce budworm. We've got a big infestation off of Highway 9 on the other side of Guffey, and it's different than the pine beetle. They don't fly from tree to tree. They crawl up from below. So you want to keep as much, again, just like with fires, keep as much of the undergrowth away from the tree and not the ladder fuels, because they hatch in the ground and then they climb up your tree. And so if you keep it as clean as you can underneath those spruces, that hopefully keep those from going. Last thing is, hopefully you don't have to do, but we've had some members of our church in that 403 fire that had to evacuate. First of all, I've got these out there. It's an evacuated thing for if you do evacuate your property, you put it on your door handle and you put all the information, your name, your phone number, where you evacuated to, emergency numbers and neighbors, all that kind of information. So good to have on there. That way, if you do have to, they know where you went and they're not searching around seeing if you're still there. And then I have lists out there of emergency supply kits, of things to put in them. And this is just a basic one, but I'll bet a lot of us still have good face masks left from the pandemic. Those are a tighter, and so they'll protect you more from smoke and things. So didn't ever have them before the pandemic, but everybody's got them now. I wouldn't get rid of them. Because, yeah, if you have to evacuate in something like that, I don't know if you guys remember that fire last year up at Marshall. I mean, they had seconds to get out. And imagine anybody with respiratory problems evacuating during that. Having a 3-day supply of non-perishable food and 3 gallons of water per person. So you're going to have this go box. You know, sometimes they say a go bag, but stuff like that, you'd have a box of it that's in a closet or out in the garage or something that you could throw in there. Hopefully you got a good map of the area, a topographical map, because what if the circuits are overwhelmed and you can't pull up Google Maps? And one thing I did the first couple of years where I live, every morning I went for a drive, all the different routes, every different direction from my house. So I know a dozen different ways to escape. Because I've heard from a lot of people at church, well, I don't know how I'd get out of there. There's only one way. Well, I'll bet there's more. I even carry bolt cutters in my vehicles, because if you got to evacuate and there's a fire service road and they're blocked off a certain time of year, they're locked. If I'm escaping a fire, I'm cutting their lock. You know, I'll replace it or I'll say I'm sorry or whatever, but I think they would be pretty understanding of that. But don't get trapped for no reason. Making sure you got prescriptions or special medications for at least 3 days. And that goes for your pets too. I know when Lori Jones had to evacuate and they evacuated our house, they didn't know for how many days. Well, she only had 3 days of medications. Well, she ended up being out of there for 5 days. So keep in mind, plan as much as you can. You know, and changes of clothing and extra eyeglasses. Of course, hopefully you always carry your credit cards with you, but do you have an extra set of car keys? A first aid kit. I've got a pretty advanced one that I keep in both of my vehicles all the time. And with that, the county as well as here at the church has the Stop the Bleed program. I definitely recommend you go through that. I mean, most of the injuries you're going to find are at home, but the first time I took that course, within 2 weeks, there was a rollover a quarter mile south of my house, and I was the first responder. I had to go home first because there was no cell phone service. Called 911, grabbed my Stop the Bleed kit, and I was back there administering the head injuries on this lady before the ambulance got there. So at least I knew what I was doing. And the EMTs were all freaking out that I was doing this, and they asked me all these questions like, wow, you knew what to do. You took all the precautions. You did it right. If we can get all of us to do that. Well, and in addition to that, please, everybody get CPR first aid training. Because most of the time, the CPR is administered in your own home. Um, Flashlights. I'm a geek, I guess, about flashlights, and I've got all kinds of miniature ones, but every vest that I have, I've got a flashlight. Sometimes, some of them are about half this size, but I just always have one. Lori Jones calls me a Boy Scout for that, you know, but that's okay. Yeah, and as far as important documents and stuff, we have little bit bigger, thicker than our briefcase sized fire safes at home that just have a handle, just like a briefcase. We got 2 of those. Everything's in those, so if you got to leave fast, you don't have to go rummaging through the doors. It's just grab those and go. And if you do have pets, keep that in mind of food and water for them. Family photos and things like that. Years ago, Sandy went and scanned all of our physical photos, and they're now all on a hard drive. So, but it's on an old tower computer. I don't know, did you ever download those to thumb drives? Okay, so she's got them all on thumb drives, so at least you wouldn't lose those. And valuables and things around your house. I went crazy with my cell phones are so good with such good cameras now. Take pictures of everything. Just go through room by room. Out in my shop, I went crazy, all the different things. You know, if you have to evacuate, and what if, okay, it doesn't get destroyed, but we hear of other problems of looters. You know, how are you going to tell your insurance company, oh, I owned this, it was really, really nice? And they're going to say, yeah, sure you did. So just think about all those things. If you had to go and the worst happened, either that thing burned to the ground or there was looters or something like that, protect your property and record it all that you can. So that's my biggest ideas. Anybody have any more questions? Make sure you look at those tables out there. There's quite a bit of information I didn't cover, but additional information, and please take this stuff with you. I got plenty of it. I'm actually going to be doing the same thing over at the Senior Center on Tuesday. Thank you.